Hey guys, Static here with a new PvP build for the Horns of the Reach patch. This is a dual wield build primarily focused on outputting as much bleed damage as possible. So grab yourself a tourniquet, this is the Hemorrhage build. This is a very specific build that won't be applicable in all scenarios. It's a different playstyle than I'm used to, but it's a lot of fun. I find this setup works well in small scale situations, particularly in a no CP environment. We're running medium armor here, so don't plan on 1vxing with this build unless you're duoing with a healer. Can it happen? Sure, but typically when you start getting outnumbered, you're going to struggle due to the fact that most of our damage is single target based. I am going to offer an alternative to going full medium by replacing one of our sets with a heavy solution for those situations where you feel you may need it, which we will get a look at once we get to the gear. I'm playing this on my main as Stamina Sorcerer, but this build can literally work on anything. Stamsorc has no class-specific spammable ability or dots in their toolkit, so transferring this build to another class that has those luxuries just means this setup will be even stronger. You may have noticed if you've been following my builds for a while that something has changed with my Stamsorc. I feel dirty about it, but I'm no longer an orc. Orc is still a fantastic choice for this build, don't get me wrong, and for PvP it may even outweigh what I'm currently running. But with the changes to traits and Mundus stones that came with Horns of the Reach, along with my lack of daggers in my best in slot gear sets, I made the call to go Khajiit for this patch to gain the crit just so I can compete DPS wise. The extra crit doesn't hurt on a Stamsorc in PvP because of the crit surge anyways, so for me it was a good change. Let's take a look at our stats. As you can see, our weapon damage is actually quite nice, nearing 4k weapon damage with a whopping 51% crit, and that's without our major savagery buff. So if you slot in a movable pot that has major savagery on it, you're going to be sitting at over 60% crit, which is a fuck ton. People have impen out there, I get it, but I still value crit. You have to remember that high crit rates on a Stamsorc is always going to be a viable option because crit equals heals through that crit surge. Your other option for pots are immovable with movement speed and immovable with health. You also have the immovables with stealth detection, though they do give magicka back, which isn't as big of a deal on a Stamsorc because you can convert that magicka into stam through our dark deal. Our HP is low. In Cyrodiil it's about 20k. You can slot tri-stat glyphs on your helm, chest, and legs and be closer to like 21, maybe 22k, or just go tri-stat all around, which is what I suggest doing. I just haven't invested in them as of yet. Stam is a bit on the lower side as well because Khajiit doesn't have a bonus to max stam, but if you rolled a red guard or an orc, you'll be sitting well over 30k. Our recovery is quite nice, even though we run full weapon damage enchants on our jewelry because we're still running Jewels of Misrule, which I think is best for Sorc in PvP as it allows you to use your dark deal pretty much indefinitely. I am a vampire for the extra regen and undeath passives, but that can be dropped if you don't want to take the extra fire damage. If you do that, you could run Orzurga's Smoked Bear Haunch over the Jewels of Misrule and be sitting over 1k health recovery as well. But I wouldn't run that food unless you take Vampirism to stage 1 or remove it altogether as it's not cheap to run and it would be a waste with the reduced health recovery with Vampirism. We also will be running Warrior for larger damage and heals. You could go with Lover for a lot more penetration, but you won't be gaining healing, so I go with Warrior here. Penetration is sitting close to 7k with our traits and CP. Penetration is still not only viable in PvP, it's still very strong. No matter the situation, you will always want penetration. There's no larger damage output boost than to raise your penetration, so don't shy away from those sharpened weapons. Our resists are looking decent for medium armor as well, meaning they're around 15 or 20k, which is around 25% reduction while buffed. Crit resists are also looking good. I am missing one piece of impen still, or we would be over 1800 crit resists, and that would be around 25% damage reduction as well. I have the heavy alternative set on a keybind here, so let's get buffed up and take a look at our stats. As you can see, things are still very similar in most aspects. Resists go up, stam recovery dips a touch, and weapon damage drops a few hundred. Crit, while still being very respectable in heavy armor at 40% without daggers or savagery, is due to the Khajiit passives, which did drop a little bit. So in a nutshell, you're trading a bit of damage for a bit of survivability stat-wise. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the gear. Blood Drinker is a brand new set from the Horns of the Reach that comes out of Bloodroot Forge. The 5-piece bonus gives 20% larger bleed damage to all of our bleeds. This kind of damage boost has never existed on a gear set before, so this allowed for a different kind of theory crafting. This will be our constant gear that will not change between our heavy and our medium setups. Let's talk bleeds for a minute. There aren't many sources for bleeds in the game, so what I've tried to do is compile all of them into one setup. One very important thing to remember about bleeds is, though they are purgeable, they go through block and they go through shields. I can't tell you how many permablock tanks and shield spamming Magicka users have panicked because they have no idea why their usual methods of mitigating damage is doing nothing once I place my dots on them. It's pretty funny to witness actually. Our next set also is new with the Horns of the Reach patch and drops from the other new dungeon, Falkreath Hold. Pillar of Nirn is one of the only sets in the game that when procced will place a bleed on your target, so it's a natural counterpart to Blood Drinker, and it is enhanced by the 20% damage boost of the bleed damage. Now the last piece of the puzzle are all VMA axes, 2 one-handers and 1 two-hander. The traits are sharpened on our front bar where most of our damage dealing time is spent, and on the back bar I like infused for the extra dot damage on our gap closer as well as extra passive weapon damage for our rally. But really anything is fine here, as long as it is an axe. It doesn't even have to be a VMA battle axe, it's just a bonus if you have one. Why axes? Well, there are passives both in the dual wield and the two-handed skill line that give extra bonuses depending on the type of weapon used. Axes, you guessed it, bleed damage, and quite large bleeds as well. The really interesting thing about these tooltips is that they're not only affected by your buffs, such as Major Brutality, we'll raise this one here, but also they are empowerable by VMA Rapid Strikes enchantments. If they happen to trigger after a Rapid Strike, which is our main spammable, so it does happen often, then the bleeds become monstrous. I'll give you an example right here. Unbuffed, it's about a 13k, 12k bleed. So we'll go ahead and get Rapids and have Rally up. And now look at our tooltip here. Almost 19k physical damage over 6 seconds. Imagine if that happens on your Twin Blade and Blunt and your heavy weapons. That's a lot of bleeds. Let's go ahead and take a look at my heavy armor choice. This can replace Pillar of Nirn if you're finding yourself outnumbered or just feeling squishy in general. One thing this build lacks in its medium incarnation is a source of Defile. Cyrodiil's Crest is a very underrated set for builds that lack Defile, as it places the debuff on any target you hit with a melee attack every 5 seconds. Defile can be cleansed, it's true, but purging isn't cheap, and that Defile is going right back on you again whether you like it or not. The base percentage of Major Defile in a no CP environment is 30%. But with points into Befoul in a CP campaign, you can reduce the target's healing by nearly 50%. While they are bleeding out, it's very tough for them to heal through this kind of a situation. Let's talk skills now. You have some skills that I find are non-negotiable and others that can be replaced based on the gameplay style you like or the content you're doing in general. Let's start with Rapid Strikes. Rapid Strikes, regardless of whether you choose to morph it to Bloodthirst or not, it is 100% necessary as it empowers all of our dots with Maelstrom axes. Rending Slashes, once again, you can morph this to Blood Craze if you wish, but it's another keeper regardless. This tooltip gets very large when empowered, reaching nearly 20k with continuous attacks and some other offensive PvP buffs. I do like to run Vigor on front bar, as I feel like I like to have a heal on both bars. So you can back bar this if you choose, but I like it front bar. Dark Deal is it's the main reason we're a Stamsork, really. It's our main sustain tool. Be careful when you're using it, though. It is bashable. But with experience, you can learn when it's appropriate to use this skill effectively. Our ultimate here is Dawnbreaker is Smiting, which is also empowerable by Rapid Strikes. Not the initial hit, but the dot afterwards. This is actually the only CC we have on this build. In a way, it's a good thing, as you know you can always count on that target being knocked down by this as long as they haven't drank an immovable pot or a party member hasn't already triggered their CC cooldown. The first skill on the bar which I skipped is our Flex Spot. I like Trap Beast as it is empowerable by the VMA weapons once again, and it does give us minor force for extra crit damage, which we have plenty of crit, so this is a great buff for us, and it also roots the target. Some other options here are Steel Tornado, which acts as an AoE execute on low HP targets, and you could run Rune Cage if you want a hard CC, which is nice on this setup in particular because as long as you don't damage that target with direct damage after you CC them, the dots you previously had on the target will not bring them out of the stun. So, if your target's out of stamina and they can't CC break, they just have to take the entire duration of all of those bleeds. The other nice thing about this skill is the fact that it does go through block. Permablock builds are susceptible to this CC, similar to Fossilize in a Dragon Knight toolkit. Most people will CC break immediately when you stun them regardless, so more often than not, when I use the skill, it's just to drop their block long enough to land an unblocked Dawnbreaker right on their face. The back bar is mainly our buff bar, but it does offer a couple of offensive abilities. Carve is a very underused skill in the game, and only really makes sense to use it on a setup like this. The Bleed, which is an AoE cleave, is not only boosted by Blood Drinker, but once again can be empowered by our VMA weapons. The added bonus of Minor Heroism just means more Dawnbreakers to the face. This is a flux spot as well though, as it's almost overkill as far as dots go to keep up. Our gap closer is Crit Rush, or you can use Stampede if you like the snare, it's up to you. A lot of the times, I won't even worry about hitting targets with an empowered carve, but I'll just crit rush in and then immediately do a bar swap animation canceled carve before getting to the front bar to start placing more dots. This triggers our two-handed VMA dot, places a carve bleed on the target, and hopefully triggers the two-handed heavy weapons bleed on them as well, just from gap closing to your target. That's 3 dots already before you even start to add empowered ones from the front bar. Of course, on reapplication, I will try and empower that carve, but on the initial encounter, a lot of times, I just want to get those dots on them and ticking as soon as possible. Hurricane is a source of major resistances, it can proc Implosion, and it gives us Minor Expedition to run down those targets. It's a must-have. Rally provides us with our Major Brutality, as well as a hot and a burst heal the longer it's been running. It's just too good not to run that. Shuffle, though expensive, I find it's necessary. I've tried to play around with other options of snare removal, whether it be Efficient Purge from the support skill line, or even Elusive Mist from the vampire skill line, but I find the Magicka better saved for dark deals than to try and afford those methods. So, stick with Shuffle. I always like to run Overload on my Sorcerer. I just feel like it would be silly not to. I mean, we're the only class that has access to a third skill bar, so why not utilize it? Stamsork doesn't have a lot of class-specific benefits at all, probably the least in the game, so you have to take advantage of the few things that we do have. Back here, I always like to keep another Dark Deal next to Spell Symmetry. These two skills used in conjunction with one another provides insane resource sustain. It is risky, so you need to do this off to the side. You need to practice, really. You need to find a place away from your targets, 5 to 10 seconds, use Spell Symmetry to trade your health for Magicka, use that Magicka to use Dark Deal to get your stand back up. And the interesting thing about it is, because of Spell Symmetry, you're going to have 28% cheaper Dark Deals, so your Magicka goes a lot further. But keep in mind, you're trading your health, and you won't be able to heal yourself for 4 seconds. So if you're with a healer, inform them, give me heals, I'm going to be dropping health here, get all your resources back, and you're good to go. I like to keep Crit Surge back here on my Overload bar. It's a long buff, it's 33 seconds long. I can generally keep it up 100% of the time, even though it's back here on my Overload bar. Caltrops are just here as an AoE snare to throw on breaches or groups while they're fighting before I gap close in. You can use it offensively or defensively to gain distance to or from your targets. It's great. Lastly, I like to keep a flex spot here, depending on what I'm doing. Rapids is a good all-around skill for group mobility, but there's times that I'll slot Purge or Siege Shield to negate the oil if we're taking a keep at the front door. Let's quickly take a look at our CP for those CP campaigns. We want to go heavily into Thaumaturge. Everything we do is a dot, so 23% out of that. We want 20% bigger crit damage. We have a lot of crit, so we might as well go into it. This Mighty, I actually don't like to put a lot of points into. It's diminishing returns quite early, so 10% out of that 15% cap is as much as I want to put in. And the rest into Penetration. Like I said, Penetration is good damage. We want 14% on our dodge roll reduction. We do want Magicka recovery. It's important. It enhances that Jewels of Miss rule quite a bit. Gives us more dark deals. And 14% into our Stam recovery. Everybody has to break free, so 14% reduction on that. 11% cheaper sprinting. The only reason I have points into here is because anywhere else it does not take you up a full percentage, so it doesn't make sense to put it anywhere. So might as well just reduce our bash cost a little bit. Now, some people see this and they say, why do you have this in there? One, it doesn't even get to 1%. Why would you do that? A little known fact is this puts a status effect on somebody. Any light or heavy attack you hit somebody with, it's going to place this on them. Somebody purges, they use something that, say, removes 2 status effects, that's going to remove 2 of your dots. Except because I have Siphoner on you, even though it's not doing anything, that counts as one of your purges. So one of those dots out of my 2 dots is still on you. So, little trick there. Keep that in mind. I do like to put some points over here. Extra healing received is nice, but it's not really about that. Once again, 2 points isn't going to take us to 4% here, so I just throw them in here. But it's really about getting less damage taken while you're trying to get a res off. I like to have that. For the little amount of points, it's worth it. 13% into our physical and spell resistances, 10% less on dots, and here's a big one, 20% on the direct damage attacks. You want to beef that up quite a bit. You could even stand to go higher into here. I don't run anything into resistant because I'm usually running with Wiko, my girlfriend, and she's throwing transmutation on me a lot of the time, so I don't need it. Even though I'm in medium armor, I generally don't need it. But if you don't have access to transmutation, somebody helping you out with that buff, definitely go ahead and put some points into here. Let me show you now how these bleeds are placed, and keep in mind that all of these dots are not mitigatable. Through your block, through your shields, you can purge them, but you can't sustain removing this many bleeds. Even Templars with their class-specific cleanse have a hard time removing this much pressure. I have my buff timers add-on set up to show you not only the skills themselves as I place them, but also the heavy weapons and twin blade and blunt bleeds as they proc, which will be shown in yellow. The green bar will show you when Pillar of Nirn procs, though you won't see the 10-second bleed associated with that proc as the add-on just won't track it. It's just the initial application, but just keep that in mind that there is a 10-second bleed from that. Also keep in mind that the damage output with Cyrodiil's Crest is very similar to the medium setup, and you will be replacing the Nirn bleed with Major Defile, which also can be tracked with buff timers. And you would see it up pretty much 100% of the time, making it a very strong option. So before going in on a target, I would want to put up Rally, Shuffle, Hurricane, get Crit Rush up, throw some Caltrops, Gap Close in, hit Carve, Heavy Weapon Bleed went, Nirn went, Empowered on the Running Slashes, Empowered Trap, re-put down another Carve, there's Twin Blade and Blunt, Empowered Dawnbreaker. I mean, this is a lot of bleeds. There's another Heavy Weapons Bleed. So as you can see, there's a lot of bleeds being put on the targets at all times. And if you have your Trap Beast down and it hits a target, you have the Minor Force as well. It's a lot of pressure. All of that damage is going through block and shields. All of it. So keep that in mind. It's a really fun setup to play, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I want to thank everyone for checking out the build. It's been a lot of fun coming up with it. Please ask questions in the comments, like and subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with future content. I really appreciate the support, and I always try to interact with all of your input and suggestions, so don't be shy. I'll catch y'all later and see you next time.